Evening, my name is Luxiana Serif. I'm a teacher with Eve University, and tonight I'll be going over the introduction to wormhole mechanics. This class will teach you a little bit about wormholes. I have been flying with Eve Uni for about a year. My main lives now in a C5 Corp, and I pretty much do 95% of my time in Eve in a wormhole of some kind of variety, so I have a lot of experience here. This class will go over the following sort of subjects. So what is JSpace? Where does it exist? And why is it different from New Eden? We'll touch on the classifications and characteristics. We'll cover system classes, traits unique to JSpace, weather. We'll touch a little bit about some special systems, such as Thera or drifter holes. And traveling around JSpace will be another topic. We'll also go into what exactly are wormholes, how this differs from JSpace, what a static is versus a wandering. Again, classifications and characteristics, how you can know the information in game, so know what's your wormhole, to know exactly what all that information means, and some special wormholes. And finally, there'll be some basic tips and tricks. We have a lot of things to cover. It's wormholes and JSpace is one really big topic, and as such, there's kind of an assumption that you have some general knowledge of scanning, bookmarks, and dscan. If you don't, that's okay. Still be here. Just understand we won't have a lot of time to go into those details and how to do those things, but you can seek out some of the intro classes listed here, such as Intro to Exploration, Intro to Bookmarks, or Intro to dscan, if you want a primer on those subjects. So lots of people refer to JSpace as spooky space. More commonly, you'll hear it just called wormholes, wormhole space. Though technically a wormhole is a doorway between systems and not the system itself. For the most part, however, when people refer to it, you'll hear them say W or H space or wormhole space. They mean a J system. Some people refer to these as W space as well because wormholes, but most people will say J space. Consequently, people who live in wormholes also refer to New Eden as K space or known space. They're called JSpace because the system names are all J followed by 6 numbers, such as J164710 or J200727. And beyond just that, in the lore, the JSpace systems all exist in another cluster called Anoikis, and they're not really part of New Eden. Additionally, in the lore, JSpace is the home of the Drifters and the Sleepers. They were factions of the Second Jovian Empire who fled to Anoikis near the fall, and potentially did so to escape other angry Jove factions. And when the Triglavians refer to the great enemy, you might hear them say, they're actually referring to the Drifters and the Sleepers. And it's worth noting that Poshvin is technically wormhole space, but no wormhole really believes or accepts it. It's just not the same. All wormhole space shares several characteristics. You don't have a local member list, and people don't show up there unless they talk. There are no jump gates, and consequently no permanent connections between systems. And with one exception, there are no NPC stations, and also there are several systems where even players can't anchor a structure. For player anchor structures in JSpace, there's no asset safety, and when that station is destroyed, everything in someone's hangar spills out into space into crates. You can find combat space here that are unique to JSpace, such as full of drifters and sleepers, as well as relic and data sites that are guarded by the same rats, and these rats use more advanced AI than you find in missions. You can also find fullerene gas clowns here, the only place to do so. If you're into exploration and the Minesweeper minigame, you can find pirate faction data and relic sites here, the same that you would find in Null. Poshvin also shares a lot of these qualities, which is why it is technically wormhole space, such as no local member list, and players can't anchor stations. And it's cut off to the rest of New Eden, except through wormholes. But it does have gates and NPC stations. All wormhole systems are given a classification. When you hear someone talk about low-class or high-class wormhole space, this is what they're referring to. So C1 through C6 are the most common, with over 500 systems each for C1 through C5, and over 100 C6 systems. There are a couple of dozen C13 systems, which are special shattered systems, though you can find shattered systems of the C1 through C6 variety as well. C12 is Thera. It's the only named JSpace system. C14 through C18 are the special drifter holes that contain drifter hives. And Poshvin is C25 space. Most of the time, you'll be dealing with C1 through C6, and what that means is each higher class means a higher difficulty, though that does not really apply beyond C6. So, C1 combat sites are not much more difficult than low-sec combat sites, and not worth much more either. C6 sites are some of the most dangerous, but also most profitable in the entire game. To run one of these, you would need fleets of marauders that are blinged out, or dreadnoughts, basically. There are several special systems that one might encounter in JSpace, such as Thera. It's the only named system, and the only one with NPC stations, 3 of them. It's the largest system in the game, over 270 AU across. And it's a crossroads. Dozens of wormholes that spawn and lead all over K-Space and J-Space are found here. You also have shattered systems. These are special systems that had some great cataclysm occur in the past. It's probably due to drifter or sleeper experimentation. No stations at all can be anchored here. They can spawn combat sites from 1 up or 1 down of their classification. So a C4 shattered could be spawning C4 and C5 sites, or it could spawn C4 and C3 sites. And they can spawn any level gas site. There are the 5 special drifter systems, each containing a unique gated encounter that they draw their nickname from, such as Redoubt, Sentinel, Conflux. Every signature in a drifter system will be a wormhole. And they have special K-Space entrances that will show up as celestial beacons titled Unidentified Wormhole, so you don't need to scan them down. But be wary because it's a dead space pocket, so when you warp right to it, you'll land several hundred kilometers or several dozen kilometers away, and there are drifter battleships that patrol that celestial beacon, plus they go out into the system. Many J-Space systems have permanent weather effects, so these are similar to metaliminal storms found in K-Space, but those spread and grow or shrink as time goes on. In J-Space, it's constant for the system itself. They provide a variety of bonuses and drawbacks, and the percentage value of those effects gains strength the higher class the wormhole is. So just like other local system effects, such as Edencom or Triglavian Victory systems or metaliminal storms, there's an icon above your capacitor. When you mouse over it, you can see the system effects. So a quick rundown, you've got pulsars, which give you shield and cap bonuses, but your armor resist is much worse. You have black holes, which give missiles many bonuses, and everything moves faster, and it's harder to slow them down. You have the cataclysmic variable, which makes remote reps and your personal cap increased, but self-rep and cap transfer is decreased. You have magnetars, which all weapons do more raw damage but have slightly worse application stats or chances to hit. Red giants, which bombs are stronger, and when you overheat your modules it gives a bigger effect, but they'll burn out faster. And then my personal favorite, wolf riots, which increase armor and small weapons do a ton more damage. So now we know all about it, I guess at a high level. How do we get there? Well, wormholes, of course. So what's a wormhole? A wormhole is a doorway between 2 systems. It can connect practically any 2 systems, J-Space to J-Space, K-Space to K-Space, J-Space to K-Space and back, and there are even wormholes that exit into Poshfin. A wormhole is always categorized as either a static or a wandering wormhole. And every J-Space system has at least 1 static. This means you will always find a wormhole of that type in the system. Anytime that wormhole despawns due to time or mass, it will respawn again with a few server ticks. But its destination will be randomized, but it'll be the same type of destination. Any K-Space or J-Space system can have a wandering wormhole spawn in it. They are just like statics, but once they do spawn, they do not return immediately, if at all. And a wormhole has an entrance and an exit. So the system it spawns in is its entrance, and the exit side is the system it connects to. All wormholes have limits before they collapse, closing the connection. So they have time limits ranging from 4 hours to 24 hours. They have a total mass of ships that can pass through, going all the way up to over 3 million tons worth of ship. And individual transfer limits, that is how big of a single ship can pass through. So only frigates and destroyers can pass through a small hole, or you need to find an extra large hole to bring in a dreadnought. So the first 2 values there, time limits and mass, the total mass, they also have a bit of variance, and they can be plus or minus 10% of their median stated value when the wormhole spawns. And finally, wormholes have a unique mechanic called polarization. If you jump through a wormhole, you start a 5-minute timer. If you jump back through that same wormhole, you're polarized, unable to use it again for the remainder of that 5 minutes. So you can't just jump back and forth. You jump through once, you jump right back through, you end up polarized, and you can't go back through that wormhole for a few minutes. How do you find wormholes? You can find them by scanning down cosmic signatures, and you can find these cosmic signatures through your probe window or F9. There'll be the red unknown signature. You'll need a probe launcher, core scanner probes to do this, and again, if you need more, try catching one of the intro to exploration classes. The scanning difficulty is pretty low. Generally, a scanning strength of 85 or so is enough. From the probe window itself, this image in the back here, there's no way to tell where it goes. But once you land on grid, there will have a letter plus 3 number identification in your overview. So you can see in the front image here, K162. You might also see things such as H296, L003. There's a lot of them. So this is not the signature ID. That's the one in the back there. So on this picture here, TZZ-062, that's the signature ID, but rather the type of wormhole it is. And each type has specific set values of the time to live, the total mass, the maximum mass per jump, and its destination type. And some wormholes are basically defined as statics. So, for example, a C5 system with a C5 static will always have an H296 as their static. So every time that static respawns, once it's been collapsed or it times out, when it spawns again, it'll be another H296. But it will go to a new C5 system. And remember that wormholes are a doorway, and every door has an outside and an inside, or in this case, an entrance and an exit. Wormholes spawn on one side, the place where they spawn from, and they exit to the system that they're going to. So if it's a high-sec wormhole, or if it's a C5 wormhole, or if it's a C4 wormhole, it'll exit into one of those types of systems. And that exit side is always going to be seen as a K162 type. So you can see on this picture up here, wormhole K162. That means this is an exit. And wherever this wormhole came from is spawned in that system and is exiting through here. But you can travel both ways through wormholes, it doesn't matter. Once you land on grid with a wormhole, you can right-click and hit Show Info. And you'll get a box that looks much like this. Not as colorful, though. And this is one of the most important things you can do when looking at wormhole, is it'll show you everything about the current status of this wormhole, except its exact definition. Unless it's there. But it's always going to be in the same order as you see here. So first you've got the blue at the top, which is the identification. Just in case you didn't even catch it in your overview, it's right here, H296. This is a C5 to C5 wormhole. Red is its general destination. The red is its general destination. So this wormhole seems to lead to dangerous unknown parts of space. The orange is how much time it has until it collapses naturally. So here it says the wormhole is beginning to decay and probably won't last another day. The yellow is an indicator of how much mass has passed through it. So this wormhole has not yet had its stability significantly disrupted by ships passing through it. And the green indicates the maximum amount of mass that can be put through in a single pass. So the maximum size. So very large ships can pass through. Now let's take a little bit more detail about these, because they really do matter. They're always the same sentences, same statements, and they will tell you everything you need to know, practically. So time, the orange. It might say this wormhole is beginning to decay, which means it is somewhere between the max time and 4 hours left. So between 4 hours and whatever its max is. And then you might also see this wormhole is reaching the end of its life, which means it has less than 4 hours. Now that could be 1 minute. That could be 3 hours and 59 minutes. There's no way to tell if you just arrived on there. You also have its stability. So when a wormhole says has not had its stability reduced, this means there's still greater than 50% of its maximum mass allowed. And when it says stability reduced but not to a critical degree, this means between 10% and 50%. Wormhole is often called the shrink or destab or reduced, i.e. the whole wormhole is shrink or the wormhole is destabbed. And when it says stability reduced to a critical degree, that means there's less than 10%. At that time, again, just like with time, it could be the full 10% or it could be 1 kilogram. And wormholers call this crit. So the mass right here, these 3 threads are very important for what's called rolling a wormhole, where you will deliberately put enough mass through the hole in order to collapse it and force it to respawn. So the destination line will say, if it's going to wormhole space, it'll say leads to an unknown system, and that'll be a C1 through or a C3, C1, C2, or C3. It might say lead to a dangerous unknown system, and that'll be a C4 or C5. And it might say lead to a deadly unknown system, and that'll be a C6. It can also say leads to a high sec, or leads to a low sec, or leads to a null sec, and it can even say leads to Triglavian space. And beyond just all that, when you're sitting on a wormhole, there's a couple of audio-visual clues as well. So, first off, most importantly, is the wormhole itself, the spinning orb, shows the skybox of the system that can lead to. So if you're sitting on a wormhole in wormhole space and you find a wormhole and you're looking at it and it's bright blue in the center, then that probably leads to Caldari space because they have the blue nebula in all of their skyboxes. So when they lose mass and hit that stability reduce, it'll actually shrink a tiny little bit. But once again, near that crit shrink, it'll shrink again, and it's actually pretty noticeable if you're sitting there and watch it. And during the end of life phase, the hole will wobble. It'll kind of pulse and move, and it'll be kind of erratic looking, and that means it's getting close to end of life. Also, the aura of the wormhole itself tells you a little bit about its mass limits. So, for instance, if you see a wormhole with blue energy lines coming off it, that's what we call a frig hole. It can only take frigates and destroyers. If you see one with orange lines coming off it, it can take any size ship that can go into wormhole space. So dreadnoughts and down below, basically. Carriers, dreadnoughts, and below. And just like jump gates, there's a visual and audio cue when someone goes through, and it's seen unheard on both sides. So the wormhole will pulse and it'll make a distinct sound. So also remember that the total mass and time to live is subject to plus or minus 10% of its median value. So if you have a wormhole that says its total mass is 3 million tons, it could be up to 3.3 million tons, or it could be all the way down to 2.7 million tons. And that 50% mass value and that 10% mass value adjust accordingly to whatever that is. So you're in J space, you want to get around. You jump through a wormhole, you found yourself in an oikos. Now what? First thing you're going to do is you're going to bookmark the wormhole. Don't move. Don't break your gate cloak. Bookmark the wormhole. When you're bookmarking a wormhole, you want to bookmark the actual wormhole in your overview, not the signature. Regardless of whether you just get it down or you just pump through. Look for your overview, right-click on your wormhole in your overview, and select Save Location. The reason for this is very important because when you warp to a signature, you're actually warping to a point that's about 10k away from the actual wormhole. And you'll land anywhere between 1 to 3k off of that point as well. So you could be, upwards of 13, 14 kilometers away from the wormhole when you land, and then you have to move towards that wormhole. Since you need to be within 5 kilometers of a wormhole to jump through it, if somebody's chasing you, you will have to slow boat your way into that wormhole and they can catch you and land on top of you. If the bookmark is the actual wormhole itself, then when you warp to it, you'll land within 2 to 3 kilometers off of that, or give or take, and you can jump right through, basically. It's also really good to have a kind of a system or something for bookmarking your way home, wherever home may be. That could be a wormhole you're living in. That could be some high-sec system that you just came through, such as putting a star and then dash home on the wormhole you just came through, so that when you're going back, all you have to do is keep following that same star dash home bookmark all the way back. Next thing you want to do is you want to build a safe somewhere off the direct route between 2 celestials. And if you take the Intro to Bookmarking class, you can learn how to do this. And then cloak up, start scanning. You might want to be using a mapper, such as Pathfinder, Tripwire, Evi has one involved in it as well, Galaxy Mapper. So the Uni has a Unista only Pathfinder found at pathfinder.eveuniversity.org. And don't fret. If you get lost, there are lots of ways to get home. You can just keep scanning. You'll eventually find your way out. If you lose your probe somehow, pretty much only by disconnecting and not reconnecting, you can use Eve Scout Rescue, and they'll come and find you. But if you're not carrying like a super expensive head and not in a really expensive ship, it's probably better to just self-destruct and go home. Now, some do's and don'ts in Spooky Space. So first off, again, bookmark that return home. You'll be much thankful you don't have to scan it down. If you don't recognize a site name, check it on the wiki before you warp to it. There are several that will log you and kill you before you can warp away. Even if you're cloaked, you'll get decloaked when you land. You want to spam that D-scan. The hotkey is V by default. A lot of people change it to spacebar, but that's the only way you're going to know if there's anybody else in the system is if they show up on D-scan. And if you can help it, stay cloaked. Doesn't even have to be a GovOps cloak, just a regular cloak will be fine. If you're not in warp, you should probably be cloaking. That's again, keeps you off a D-scan. And if you must be uncloaked, try to keep moving. The more you move, the harder it is to be combat scanned. Don't warp straight to the sun. I can't tell you the amount of people I've caught who've warped straight to the sun at 0, and I've just caught them. Don't warp to moons. Many Wormhole corps will POS lock their system by putting a POS at every moon, a player-owned starbase at every moon, those control sticks. And if they have guns, they'll blow you up, they're automated. And don't panic. It feels spooky, but just grab your towel, start scanning. So you should consider using a mapper when exploring wormhole space, and there are third-party programs that use the ESI to help coordinate vast chains of wormholes. Not only does it help keep track of where you are and where you've been, but also helps others, because mappers share that information with anyone given the right permissions to do so. This means when you update the wormhole map for, say, the nullsec community or the wormhole community in Uni with a new wormhole, others can see that there is one in that system if they want to go check it out. So EveUni uses Pathfinder, as I mentioned. You can find our instance at pathfinder.eveuniversity.org and use this one if you're in Uni. Don't just use whatever random Pathfinder you find on Google. And for the most part, every corp will run their own instance of a mapper rather than use any public ones. This is a security mindset to keep the data about which systems are in their chain and who's actively contained into their control. And in addition, beyond Pathfinder, there's Tripwire, there's Galaxy Mapper. Those are both kind of very similar, Galaxy Mapper and Galaxy Finder. And EVI has its own version that it's doing, which is a kind of a new thing. There's actually not an install your own instance version of EVI, so don't know how many people end up using that, but it's available. And there's not really a lot of space to cover this, but hop and mumble and ask any of the wormholers in Discord, and just look for some YouTube videos. There's some great ones out there for how to use Pathfinder. So now that you know the basics of Wormhole and JSpace, what is there to do? Well, a lot of people just day trip into JSpace. That is, they find wormholes in K-Space, and they enter them, and they do a little of whatever. Others live in JSpace full-time, anchoring citadels and making a life out of there, and there's no guarantee you're going to have a K-Space connection, so it's a lot of fun. As a day tripper, it's got some of the highest IST sites for new explorers. It's the same sites you will find in Null, but you can find them just 1 or 2 jumps from HighSec if you're lucky. Combat anomalies drop what's called blue loot, which is similar to the Overseer's personal effects from D&D sites or the red loot from Abyssals. It's sold to NPCs at various stations for a lot of ISK. And Fullerene gas clouds spawn only in wormholes. They're gigantic clouds, some with over 20,000 units of gas in it. But rats do warp to them after 20 minutes. Just remember, it's easy to get lost. There's no local, which can be very scary for someone used to that constant source of intel, and as such, it's very easy to get caught unaware. If you want to live in JSpace full-time, there are some advantages. There's always a new system to check out. When your current static has dried up, you just roll it. You warp, you've done all the gas, you killed all the combat sites, and you still want to do more, you just roll that wormhole and you get a new site, new system. The PI on planets is the same as a null, and there'll be far less people using it. And the PvP is great, and it's usually pretty honorable. You'll find a lot of small gang PvP going on in wormholes. We all love the PvP. That's one of the reasons we're out there. But it's still more difficult to have more than one system. Obviously people have farms and more systems than just one, but there's a lot more work to it. You can't just jump through a gate and you're in another system. You have to make sure you have a seed in that system that can get a path out of that system back into K-Space so you can find your way over there, and then who knows how long it is. And like that, it's possible to just get rolled out of your system. And if there's no one inside your home that can find you a path back out, it could be months before you find your way back in. And there's no asset safety. When that station blows up, everything that's inside of it falls out and can be picked up by anyone. So everything you bring into a wormhole, you just consider it already lost, because it will be at some point. And if this has tickled your fancy and you want to follow up, there's some more classes you could take. You could take the Intro to Wormhole Living, which will give an overview of some of the considerations and dangers about living in wormholes, such as making a coffin alt or protect against evictions. And if you plan on or have recently joined the Wormhole community, the WHC, then Intro to WHC can give you more information about the community we foster there. If you want to do a tiny little slice of Wormhole of WHC, then try to attend a Noob's Night in the Hole. We usually run these about one night once a month, and we take an entire travel fleet into the Wormhole for a night of fun. And a bit of a more rare class, but we try to occasionally run an Intro to Pathfinder class to give you some lessons on Pathfinder, but you'd be probably better suited doing a quick YouTube search. And finally, here's some pretty useful links. You got Eve Scout Rescue, and if you're lost, you can call these guys. They will come find you. It may take a couple days, but they will find you. They have an amazing success rate. There's evescout.com, which is player-sourced information about wormholes in Thera and Turner. Turner is much like Thera, but it's a case-based system with a ton of wormholes that spawn into it rather than spawn in and warp out. But they keep track on evescout.com of all those wormholes which you can use to get around New Eden really easy. Anoik.is or Anoikis systems, and this is an online repository for all the information about wormholes and chase-based systems. Really cool stuff. You got Turbo Feeder Glory's Wormhole Identifier, which is a visual identification guide to case-based wormholes, so you can tell exactly what region you're about to jump through. You got the eveuni.org wormhole sites. This is a link shortener that we've created at EveUni, and it goes to a Google Doc with all of the combat information you may ever want for any site in wormhole space. It's basically our Bible for doing any kind of routing there. Of course, the EveUni Pathfinder instance. Well, that's the class. Thank you very much for paying attention as best you can. If you have questions, if you want to know more, hop on to the EveUni Discord. Seek me out on EveUni Discord. I'm Alabaster Crescent, and you can just find me roaming around in many channels. I like to talk.